All right, good morning. And thank you, Jordan and Elise, for bringing the whole family up here and for kids for being brave and praying with us this morning. That was really awesome. Well, it's time for us to dive into the book of Matthew. And we are halfway, we're through the first side of our little bookmark there, if you've been following through the bookmark. Week 4 of our series called Upside Down. And in this series, we are following the story of Jesus and the story of Jesus establishing this upside-down kingdom in the book of Matthew. And so that's what we've been going through together. And so these little bookmarks go along with this series that we've been going through. And if you've not got one yet, you can find these on the bench just as on your right as you're walking out of the building here. And what this basically is a reading guide for you to read through the book of Matthew along with us as we preach through it. And the goal of this is for us collectively to grow closer to Jesus and to learn more about this wonderful story of him coming to this world and living and dying for us. Now, so this week we've been looking at Matthew 9 through to 12, and my task is not to preach on Matthew 9 through to 12, but it's to choose something from those passages that especially jumps out to me to share with you. And so the passage that I've chosen to share with you today is Matthew 9, 35 to 38. And the title of this message is The Jesus That We Follow. Now already I've used this concept I've used the words follow a few times in my introduction. And in the book of Matthew, this concept comes up over and over and again, the idea of following Jesus. And I want to begin by sharing a verse from Matthew chapter 9, and verse 9, so this is not our key passage, but this is in the same chapter of our key passage, to sort of introduce this idea of following Jesus and what that is all about. And so it says this: As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. Now, there's a few things that jump out to me from this verse and this bit of this story. The first thing is that Matthew was a tax collector. And throughout history, tax collectors have never been overly popular. And especially at this time of history, people hated tax collectors. They were seen as traitors, and they'd sold out their people, and they were really despised by the people. And so the first thing we see here is that Jesus is inviting a tax collector to follow him, which tells us that Jesus is for everybody. And so no matter who you are, what your background is, whatever you are feeling this morning, I want you to know that Jesus is for you and that Jesus is extending that invitation to follow me to you as well. That's first thing, number one. The second thing that jumps out to me is that Matthew not only is the person that this verse is describing in this story, but Matthew is also writing this verse. And so this is actually kind of the autobiography, the personal testimony of Matthew. And I just sort of imagine him sitting down and writing out the events of what has happened in the story of Jesus and getting to this part and really just having a moment of reminiscing on that moment when Jesus looked at him and when he experienced Jesus' love and acceptance for himself. So I think this would have been a really special moment. But the big thing that I want you to get from this is just this whole idea of following me. So Jesus says to Matthew, gives that invitation, follow me, and it says simply that Matthew got up, left what he was doing, and followed Jesus. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? Well, as a father of a toddler, I think I have a new appreciation of what it means to be followed. And Alora is an excellent follower, and this week it has looked like some of these kinds of things. So for example, yesterday Kylie got home and she'd just got a whole bootload of groceries, so I went out to help bring the groceries in. So I went and grabbed the first couple of bags, took them in, and Alora's like watching me take it to the kitchen. Then I went back out, got the second lot of bags, and when I got in, to my surprise, there was Ellie taking out the things from the bag. She'd opened the cupboard and she was putting the things away in the right place. And I was thinking, how on earth did Alora know how to do this? Well, she's been watching Mummy and Daddy do this very same thing. Another thing that Alora did this week was I went into our front room. Alora was playing by herself in there, and I poked my head in just to see what she was up to. and she had set a whole dinner party for her dolls. She had the table there, she got these little plates, and she put these little toy fruit and vegetables on those plates, and she was sitting there, each of the chairs had a little doll on it, and she was saying her little grace over the food, and then she said, "All right, let's eat." Now, this is not something that we had sort of stepped her through. This is something Alora had learnt from simply watching and learning from us and following. Another thing that we like to do at our house is Alora loves music, and she loves music with actions, and so sometimes this turns into these little spontaneous dance parties at our house. And so we put the music on, and Kylie and I, we just do these crazy actions. You might be flying like a bird, or we might be walking on our tippy toes, or we might be spinning around. And Alora just watches us, and she follows, and she does the exact same things behind us. Well, I think that's what following Jesus is supposed to be like. Following Jesus is about having this relationship with Jesus, watching him, watching what he does, and then enjoy following after the very same things that Jesus is doing. So, another thing, I think this might be maybe why in Matthew later, we're not up to this passage yet, so this is a little preview of what's to come, but in Matthew 18, Jesus will say, "Unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, there's probably a whole lot of things that this could mean, but maybe this idea of following and enjoying and looking up to and imitating is a part of what this verse here means. Now, back when I was probably like 11 or 12 or something, I remember I used to have this little band that said WWJD on it. Does anyone here remember these wristbands? Tammy does. Maybe some of you maybe even wore these as well when you were a kid. So this is something that I wore, and the whole idea with this, so WWJD stands for What Would Jesus Do? And the whole idea is as you going through your day, something happens, and you wonder what you should do, and you look down at that wrist, and you ask the question, what would Jesus do? And then that is to guide you in what you might do next. And so I think this is a great question. What would Jesus do? But it's not the first question that we need to ask. In order to answer this question, we have to first actually say, well, what did Jesus do? Before we can apply how do we actually live like Jesus in our day-to-day life, we have to have in our mind an understanding of what Jesus actually did when he walked this planet 2,000 years ago. And when we understand that, then we can start working out, well, what does it actually mean to live like Jesus today? And so that's why I've chosen this passage in Matthew chapter 9, because this passage, for me, gives this nice little summary of some of the key things that Jesus focused on in his ministry here on earth. So I'd like to invite you to get your Bibles out. We've got the new green Bibles there if you haven't brought one today. And let's go to Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. And you'll see there's page numbers up in the top right-hand corner as well. So Matthew chapter 9 and verse 35. And we're looking at what are the sort of these big things that characterize Jesus' ministry as he lived here on earth. So Matthew 9, verse 35, and it says this. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." So as I read this, there are three sort of key characteristics of Jesus' ministry that really jump off the page to me. And here they are. Firstly, as Jesus went about from village to village and from town to town, he spent a lot of time caring for people. And a big part of that was this work of healing, these miracles of healing people that took place. So that's number one. Number two was Jesus didn't just heal people, it also says he shared the good news with them, the good news about the kingdom. So that's number two. And thirdly, as Jesus went from town to town, he didn't just go by himself, but he had this group of disciples, these group of followers that went around with him wherever he went. And these people were watching what Jesus is doing, and they were learning how to be more like Jesus. And so these were the sort of three key focus points of Jesus' ministry. And today we're going to go through these one by one. And and we'll see what we can learn about Jesus' ministry from this. So firstly, caring for people. One of the things that becomes apparent very quickly as we start reading through the book of Matthew is the amount of time that Jesus spends healing with people. And I wanted to give you just a little taste of this by just looking at some of the headings in Matthew 8 and 9. So these are some of the healings that happened between the Sermon at the Mount, which we were talking about last week, and this passage that we just read just before. So in chapter 8, we see Jesus, he heals a man with leprosy. He heals the servant of a centurion. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. He then heals a crowd of people that bring their sick to that house. And then if we go across the page, we see Jesus heals 2 demon-possessed men. He heals a paralyzed man. He heals he raises a dead girl to life. He heals this sick woman. He heals some blind people. And he heals a person who's unable to speak. 2 chapters. And then we get to that verse that we just read in verse 35, and it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. So it's clear that Jesus spent a lot of his ministry healing people, but I don't think we all often realize just how many people Jesus was healing. Because he went into these towns, and people brought all these sick people, and sometimes he would leave, and basically the whole town would be free from sick individuals. Now, a number of years ago, I went on a trip over to Ethiopia. And one of my hidden skill that I have is I like to make balloon animals. And when I was there, I had this big bag of these modeling balloons, and we were out in this town called Hawassa, and we're at the sort of just down there in town. There's all these kids around, so I thought I'm going to make some balloon animals for these kids. So I went over to a couple of kids, and I started making a balloon dog and a balloon flower and a balloon bird and a few different things like this, and I started giving to them. So I started with a few kids that were there, but you should have seen how quickly that crowd grew. And before I knew it, I had a group of people around me, and then I had a huge group of people around me, and there's arms saying, me next, me next, me next, me next. And then the parents as well, and they were saying, I need one, I need one, I need one. And soon it was actually getting to the situation where someone actually called me aside and said, hey, I think you need to stop this because it's getting dangerous. There's so many people wanting one of these little balloon animals. That's just giving a little balloon animal away. Imagine if I came to that town and instead of giving a little balloon to people, I was giving the gift of new eyes or new legs or freedom from some sort of sickness. Imagine how the word would have spread. And imagine how before you knew it, there would have been crowds and crowds of people surrounding around Jesus. Have a look at this picture here. This is a picture from something that happened recently over in Papua New Guinea. And over in Papua New Guinea, they've been having this big program called PNG for Christ. And a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Adelaide and I heard the testimony of a young lady who's a medical student who was a part of this thing they called a super clinic. And basically they had about 300 doctors, nurses, volunteers who went to this part of Papua New Guinea, and they just put on this free medical clinic. This is how many people showed up for it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people who before this did not have access to this type of medical care, some of them walked days in order to get to this place because this was possibly their only opportunity to have a meeting with a surgeon or to have help for some medical condition that they have. So this kind of thing was happening for Jesus, town after town after town. The word was spreading, there was this hype, and people were just bringing these sick people to Jesus, and every person that came to Jesus, Jesus was healing them, person after person after person. So Jesus had this ministry of caring for people. But the question is, how might we actually follow the Jesus who cared for people? How might we actually look at what Jesus is doing here and live this out in our life as well? I don't know about you, but I don't have many experiences where I go around and I'm healing people of their blindness or raising the dead. What does it actually look like to follow this Jesus? Well, first, before we think about us, let's think about Jesus' 12 disciples. And so I want you to look back in Matthew. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 10 now. And I want you to look at what this meant to follow Jesus for them. So Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, it says, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him, and he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Go down to verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, I'm not going to get into what that is referring to, but let's go to verse 7. Jesus says, as you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Then heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, so freely give. Now imagine being one of the disciples and hearing Jesus say that to you. Someone mentioned, I think Tracy mentioned the TV show The Chosen. There's a great portrayal of the scene that happens next on that TV series. And it shows these disciples going 2 by 2 into these villages, and they're kind of like just arriving going, what are we going to do here? But then they come across someone that is unwell. And they've seen Jesus do this time and time again. So they go over to them. Maybe they place their hands on them or they say something like what Jesus has said, and suddenly they're healed. And then suddenly people come around to them and they're like, what's going on over here? And there's this crowd that starts forming and they start sharing the types of things that they'd seen Jesus sharing as well. So in a very literal way, the disciples are following Jesus and they're performing miracles and they're doing all these wonderful things. So for the disciples, following Jesus in this caring ministry was fairly straightforward. They literally were doing the exact same things that Jesus was doing. My question is, should we be seeing miracles like this as well in our own life? Bit of a challenging question. As I was thinking about this question, I was doing some research online and I came across a blog by a pastor named John Piper, and he had an article about this very question. I want to share with you something that he said that really jumped out to me. So John Piper had this to say. He said, my answer to this is fairly simple. It's this. There were fewer miracles in the Bible than you probably think, and there are more miracles today than you probably know. Fewer miracles in the Bible than you probably think. Now, when we read the Bible, it's easy to get this impression that this type of scene that we just read about there with Jesus was happening all of the time amongst all Christians throughout the history of God's people. But if you actually have a closer reading of the Bible, that's not actually what was happening. And when you go through the Old Testament, it's like there's these times where there's kind of this flurry of miracles that takes place. Or there's this surge, this swell of miraculous things that happen. But then there was also whole centuries that went by where people were wondering, well, where are those types of miracles happening today? Let me give you an example. So Gideon, some of you might remember the story of Gideon. He was, this is a story from the Old Testament, Judges chapter 6. And during this time, the people of Israel were being oppressed by these people called the Midianites. They were coming, they were harassing them, they were hurting them, and the people were terrified, and the people were wondering, where is God in the midst of all of this? So Gideon is there, he's hiding out, he's trying to get some food for his family, and the Bible says that the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And now, as you read through, Gideon didn't realize this was the angel of the Lord, this supernatural being that was standing before him. He just thinks this is some individual that's there. And he's like, what do you mean that God is with us? And so Gideon says this, pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midian. So here's Gideon. He's grown up as a kid hearing all these stories about the Exodus, about how God came down and there was these plagues upon Egypt and the Red Sea was parted and that God went before them in this pillar of fire, and there was manna from heaven, and like amazing miracles, just this huge sort of swell of miraculous things that happened. But now this is a few hundred years later, and they're going, well, where is this God? Why aren't these things happening today? And it seems as you go through Scripture that there were certain times when these things would happen in sort of a greater abundance, and then there are other times where they wouldn't happen as much. And often these things would happen during times when God is intervening to bring some sort of special deliverance for his people. Or often these miracles went along with a prophet, a specific prophet who had a message from God, and they're a way of really showing the divine origin of that message. And when it comes to the story of Jesus, so Jesus arrives here, there's this new kingdom that's happening. This is what John Piper says about maybe why there were so many miracles at this particular point in time. He says, they showed that the kingdom had broken into the world, pointing to a future day when everybody would be raised from the dead, and those who believe in Christ will not be sick anymore. In other words, he's saying, as Jesus is here in the flesh 2,000 years ago on earth, it's as if, and he's giving this message, the kingdom of heaven is here. It's as if Jesus is giving this little preview of what's going to happen when the kingdom of heaven is realized in its fullness. When Jesus comes back and everyone is raised, everyone who believes in Jesus is raised from the dead, everyone is healed, all of this sickness is done away with, and we get to live in this beautiful world transformed in fullness. And so this is kind of like this little preview. So John Piper suggests that maybe this idea that miracles are happening all the time in all places in Scripture is not always happening. But remember, he also suggested that it's possible that there's more miracles happening today than we realize. And he suggests that if you actually, I think I got rid of that quote. He said, if you actually went through and you found all these authentic stories of miracles that are happening in our world today, where people are being healed, where God is showing up and God has answered prayer, and you put those together like we have in Scripture, you might stop and say, you know what? We are living in a world full of miracles. So back to my question. If it might be true at times that God works these miracles, but it's also true that at times God is not working this big flurry of miracles like were happening in the disciples, how might we follow the Jesus who cared for people? I want to suggest that following Jesus is not so much about replicating his miracles as it is about replicating Jesus' heart. What do I mean by that? Let me share with you a passage in Acts chapter 2. And this passage here describes the early Christian church soon after Jesus has risen from the dead. So now this is a group of people that are now going out to do what Jesus has done and to live their lives following Jesus. And this is what was taking place. And I want you to notice how this work of caring is playing out in this group of early Christians. So it says this. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. So question, were there miracles and signs happening at this time? Yes, there were. But who was performing those miracles? It was the apostles. So everyone was filled with the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. So here are these 12 apostles. There might have been a few other people included in this. And these are the primary people that are working these miracles of healing and things. Like you might remember how, like I think it was Peter, and he would walk and his shadow would go over someone who was sick and they would be healed. So these types of things were happening. But who's not performing these signs and wonders in this passage? The majority of people. So how were they living out this caring ministry of Jesus? Well, it says there they were doing things like selling their property. They were finding people who had needs, and they were helping for those needs in very practical, very not supernatural ways, but in very real, tangible, helpful ways as well. I want to read you another passage here in Acts chapter 4. It says, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, And God's grace was so powerfully at work in all of them that there were no needy persons among them. What an amazing phrase, that there were no needy persons among them. Imagine a community. And in the time of Jesus, there was no shortage of needs around. But within this Christian community, it says that there was no needy persons amongst them. Was that just because the apostles were doing miracles? No, it was because this spirit of compassion, this spirit of helping and healing and caring had come upon the followers of Jesus, and to such a degree that everyone was seeing the needs around them and everyone was doing what they could to care for and to help those people. And I love that phrase where it says, God's grace was so powerfully at work, not in some of them, but in all of them. So the miracles there were not an indication of how powerfully God was at work in the life of that person, but it was in the care and the heart and the compassion that was being shared. The following Jesus is not about replicating his miracles, but it's about replicating his heart. And what was that heart of Jesus? Well, I want to go back to Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36. So Matthew chapter 9 verse 36, it says this, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. What I want you to really get from this verse is what was actually driving Jesus as he did this work of healing and caring for people. It was this compassion. So Jesus would come to this place, this town, these people would come out to him and he would see these people with their needs, he would identify with them, he would hear their stories, he would see their suffering, and it says that he would have this compassion that would then drive him. Now, the word compassion there is actually a very interesting word in the Greek language. I want to read to you this little description of this word here from the NIV application commentary. It says, the verb have compassion is splanchnisomai. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's a cool sounding word. And basically it means to be moved in the inward parts. So we translate it as compassion, but it's basically literally it's like to feel this to be moved in the internal organs. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a feeling that you've felt in your gut before. It's not just this surface fluffy feeling, but it's like a really deeply felt feeling that even has a physical aspect to it as well. And that's what is being described here of Jesus. He would see these people, and when he saw these needs, he saw this suffering, he would feel this in his gut to the point where he would be so moved with love, so moved with compassion, that he could not help but reach out and to help these people as well. And so here is Jesus, and he's going around from place to place. He's seeing these people, and he has this heart that can do nothing else but to reach out to them and to help them, to heal them, to care for them, for whatever that might be. Now, I'm not going to go through the next two sections because it's already 11 o'clock, and so I'm going to quickly race through because I've got a fair bit I was going to share, and we're going to just smash through all of this. And we're going to go to our... here we go. We're going to land the plane here. How do we live this out? I wish we could have got into talking about sharing Jesus with others and empowering others, but maybe we can get into some of that in the discussion times as well. Firstly, I want to encourage you to spend time with Jesus. That little image that I have in my mind of Alora dancing behind us, pretending she's a bird, watching us with these big open eyes, enjoying just being around us. For me, that really speaks a lot into me of the type of relationship that Jesus wants to have with us. I want to really encourage you to foster that kind of relationship in your own life. If you haven't got these bookmarks yet, I encourage you to grab one of those on the way out and spend that time simply enjoying Jesus, spending time with Jesus, watching him, learning from him, seeing his story, seeing what Jesus actually did, so that we can learn how to live out not just the specific actions, but the heart of Jesus in our day-to-day lives. Number two, I want to encourage you to, as you spend time with Jesus, to learn from him how to follow him in these areas, to be someone who cares for others, someone who shares that good news of Jesus, and also empowers others. Now, we didn't get to those second 2 points, but you can imagine what they are going to be talking about. Simply, I want to encourage you to actually reflect on what is it that Jesus did when you're reading through Scripture and you're saying, all right, here we see Jesus healing this paralytic. How do I actually follow this out in my own life? How do I care for people? How do I share like Jesus did? How do I show the same sort of kindness and compassion that Jesus did? And the third one, we didn't get to that one, so I'll share with it as a thing to finally finish with. So, Matthew chapter 9 and read verse 36 through to verse 38. This is a little preview of what I didn't get to cover today, but it says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Remember that picture that I showed of in Papua New Guinea where there's like these thousands and thousands of people coming? I want you to imagine that you are the one doctor who showed up for that super clinic. Imagine you turn up there, all these people, and you just look out and you see this incredible need all around you, and you realize that you're the only person there to help them. How would that feel? I think that would feel totally overwhelming. And that's kind of what I think Jesus is feeling in this moment. He looks out, he sees all these people that are coming, they have this need of physical needs, they also have these deep spiritual needs, and Jesus looks out at this and he sees all these people, and he has this heart, just reaches out, and he realizes that even Jesus, as the Son of God, is one person who could only be in one town at one time. And he says, the harvest, the group of people that are willing and ready to receive something from God is so great, but the workers are so few. And Jesus there invites us and he gives us a prayer that we can pray in our own lives, which is this. Pray, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So Jesus invites us to take upon ourselves the same burden that he has, that the need around us is so big, but yet the workers are few, to pray to God specifically and say, God, I want you to raise up new people around us who are going to be passionate, who have your heart and are passionate about the work of sharing and caring for people. And so that's my encouragement for you to pray that prayer. And you know who the first person is that the first way God is going to answer that prayer is by sending you. And so pray that God will raise up people for this work and be that first person to answer that call from Jesus, to go out into the great harvest and to replicate Jesus' heart and his ministry in our lives. Yeah, let's finish there. So I'd like to invite the musicians to come up, and then we'll finish with prayer.